All right, well, you can go ahead and turn your Bibles to Matthew 2. That's where we're going to be today. And while you're turning there, if you were here for Frozen last Sunday, that was awesome. So, again, thank you to, yes, Evan, you did great. So, thank you to the students that were in it, the kids, the adults that worked so hard on that as well. It was pretty cool. I think it was the biggest attendance we've had for a show. It was 203 people from when Carol started. I don't know how many more walked in after that, but we ran through like every chair in the building, and so it was packed in here. And the students did just a fabulous job, and so you guys put in a lot of work. It was hard, I know, sometimes. It's tough to memorize all those lines and to hit all those notes, but good job on everything. So nice work there. And then, yes, and then last night, Hans was pretty good too, so good job. Last night we had our youth Christmas party, and that's always a good time as well. It gets pretty messy, and there was a lot of Vaseline involved at one point on their faces as they pretended to be Santa with cotton balls on it. And we did a lot of blindfold things in youth group as well. Nobody got injured, which they had to like cut and wrap presents blindfolded. So you can imagine scissors and blindfolds, but they pulled it off and there were no injuries. So that's always a plus. And then they do gifts exchange and crazy socks. And so we just had a good time last night. Our youth are pretty awesome students, so we like y'all. Good job. Yay. For those that don't know if you're a parent of a youth and your kids did not tell you, we have our youth mission trip planned as well for this coming June. And so that's going to be to Indianapolis this year. So we're going to have a fun time with that. We're going to drive there. It's an hour longer drive than Colorado, so your kids get even a little bit more time of Aubrey and my music. So our youth summer trips are always a lot of fun. They're a highlight, I know, of the adults as well, even though we're exhausted after and during. But it's still a great time. And again, the students get to know kids from all over because they put them they pair them up or put them in groups with students from all over the country that come, and then they go out and they serve the community. And so this time it's going to be in Indianapolis, and so that's going to be a good time. It's going to be at the end of June. All right, so we are in Advent. Today we have the third candle lit, which is joy. It's the pink candle. And again, Advent is about the arrival of the King. A lot of times when we think of the season of Advent, we think just of the birth of a baby, and that's a part of Advent, but that's not everything. Advent points us forward, right? Advent means arrival. It means coming. It means the King is coming back. And so that's what the season of Advent is. It's bringing us into the future, bringing the future to us now of what we're expecting, what we're preparing for, and it reminds us about all of that. And that when he comes, it's also the arrival of these four things as well that the candles symbolize. And so we started with week 1 with hope, right? The advent of hope. Last week was the advent of love. I misspoke earlier. Advent of love. Then today we're at the advent of joy. Next week we'll be at the advent of peace on Christmas Eve, and then at Christmas Eve service we're going to talk about the advent of Christ. And so that's where we're going. And so today, as we start with the advent of joy, the arrival of joy, the coming of joy, we're going to be in Matthew 2. And so that's where we're going to start in Matthew 2:1, and it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. Now, King Herod was a king who loved his power. He was Jewish, but the people he was for his power. He was for Rome, and so he wasn't really beloved by the people. He loved his power, and he loved his taxes. And so he was at odds with the people as well. They knew him as ruthless. He would end up killing his wife and 2 kids because he was paranoid about power, and he wanted to maintain it. And so he's not a nice king. So it says, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Magi from the east. Are Magi from the east, are those going to be Israelites, or are those going to be Gentiles? Gentiles. So we see one of the very first groups of people that recognize the arrival of the king and the birth of a baby isn't to the Israelites, and it's not to the Jewish people, it's to Gentiles from the Far East. And depending on what translations, you might have a footnote, astronomers or astrologers. And so there were people that were looking to the stars. But it's interesting that right off the bat, we see it's Gentiles that are taking note. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, months-long journey, right? Because they have to go up the Fertile Crescent and around. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Right? Because when the real king shows up, false kings are threatened. And all Jerusalem with him. And when he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah, the Christ, was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. Bethlehem was a smaller area. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. So after following the star for months, it finally stops. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. These Gentiles from the east are overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. And then they opened their treasures, presented to him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. And so the Magi had been on a journey for a long time, and when they saw the star over the Christ, they knew that they were finally there, the place that they had been searching for. And they didn't all know what to expect, but they knew that there was something about the star, and there was something about this coming of this Christ that caused them to be overjoyed, and that made the journey worth it. And sometimes in our walk with God, we can start to think, is this worth it? Like, have you thought that? Is it worth it to get up and go to church? Is it worth it to tithe? Is it worth it to go to a life group or a Bible study? Is it worth it to show grace to somebody who hurt you? Is it worth it to follow God's ways, all of them, even the ones you don't like? Because we get tired and we get worn out, and other options start to look better to us in our fallen nature, even if we know that those other options are going to not be as good for us, right? We still sometimes have those desires where we still want to follow it. They look more fun. But the advent of joy declares that it's absolutely worth it to stay in God's ways and to follow him, because at some point when the king comes, the arrival of joy to come with it will be so overwhelming. And those Magi just got a glimpse of it, right? All they saw was the star of the Christ that stopped, and they were overjoyed. How much more when we're in the fullness and the presence of the King, that we can take pride in how we lived for God today. And so how does the advent of joy, the coming of joy, help us live now? So think of one of the times in your life when you were in a time or a period. It might have been a day or two, it might have been a week, it might have just been for an hour, it might have been like 15 minutes. But when was the last time that you would say that you felt and lived in absolute joy? Okay? Not contentment of like everything's good. And not happiness, right? Because happiness is dependent on our circumstances. Joy springs from the internal part. So when was the last time that you could say that you were absolutely living in a state of joy? And it might be like if you've been there, you might have felt that like nothing could take it away. You felt completely at peace. right? And so maybe it could be that you had heard a message, right? Or that you had been in the Bible that morning and there was just something that clicked. Or maybe you were listening to a song on the way to work, right? And there was something about that just empowered you. Or maybe you just woke up and maybe the Spirit was just doing something in your life, but all of a sudden you just felt like, man, like I am just completely at peace. And then you get to work and something goes wrong. A customer yells at you. You're like, all right, that's fine, whatever. You know? Or your car breaks down. You get a flat tire and you're like, oh, yeah, that happens, right? But it's those times when nothing seems to be able to disrupt you, right? You go to school and your teacher's like, guess what? We have a quiz today. You're like, okay, that's cool, right? And like you're in this state of joy that nothing can bring you down, and you know that life's not perfect, but like where you're at, like everything is just good. You're at complete peace, and you're happy with how things are, and you know that you're following God, and everything is just clicking into place. Even the things that are going wrong, they're not really distracting you at all because you're just at this point where you're in a mindset and a heart full of joy. But now imagine, because that's fleeting, it can be intense, but it can be fleeting. But now imagine that you're in that state continually. And it's even elevated. And you're overjoyed. Right? That's going to be like what it's like when the King comes. And we know that everything is going to be okay. And sin and death are going to be done away with. And we're going to be in his presence. And we get to have eternity like that in the love of the King. And so how does knowing that then play a part in how we live now? Well, Jesus told his disciples that by remaining in his ways and words, that his joy would be in them, and their joy would be complete. He says in John 15, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. So if we remain focused on the Christ, complete joy comes with it. And although we will ultimately experience that when sin and death are done away with, we get glimpses of it now. And just like joy can carry you through a hard time at work or a rough season of life, school for 4 years, joy can carry us through things right now. And so I've got just 4 ways that joy can help us, the future joy can help us today in our struggles. And so joy, the advent of joy, can help us overcome a spirit of envy. And envy is all around us today. It shows up from the time we're pretty much born and we want what our sibling wants to the time that we die. It shows up when you look at your friends and see that they have a new phone and yours works perfectly fine, but you're like, you know what, I think I need a new phone too. It shows up in hearing that our coworker went to Disney and we're like, you know what, I need to go to Disney. Right? Because we want to see and have those experiences. And so it shows up when you look on social media and see what those that you haven't talked to in 40 years are doing, and you're like, you know what, I need to do that too. And envy can cause us to do things and get in places that cause us struggles, because envy gives us a false reality of what we need. James says, for where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. Envy can throw your life into disorder. So we see our neighbors, and they get a new car, and although ours works perfectly fine, then what do? We start to think, man, I could use a new car. And so maybe you go to the dealership, and you've got what you can afford, and those cars look good, but then you see a different one, which has a little more things that you like. And it's a little outside of your price range. But guess what? You think in the moment with the emotions that, man, I think I could make it work. Right? And then we get ourselves into financial trouble, right? We can throw ourselves into disorder financial disorder because of envy. And so envy can wreak havoc in our lives because we're not content. And so, but joy says, I am perfectly content with where I'm at and the track that I'm on in life. And so if I'm good right now and I want to be here in 10 years financially, then I don't need that car today. Right? Joy enables us to be completely satisfied where we're at. Envy will wreck us. Because again, both come from the internal, right? Joy comes from the internal out. But envy also starts in the heart and says, well, I want that. And I need to impress my friends, so I need to buy this or dress like that. And so envy is all around us. We're envious of others. People are envious of you. And by the way, people are going to be envious of you. What are they envious about? Let them be envious of your relationship with God. Israel was. Psalm 106 says, in the camp, those that were against Moses and Aaron, they grew envious of Moses and Aaron, who was consecrated to the Lord. Right? And then they tried to take the power of Moses, and because they were envious of their relationship with God. And then God did an earthquake, and they fell in. Right? But if someone's going to be envious about you, let them particularly be envious about your relationship with God. Let that spur them on to desire that. And so joy can help us overcome a spirit of envy. It can also help us overcome a spirit of negativity. All of us have people and know people who tend to live with a negative spirit because maybe of past events or hurts or habits. You know, others of us, perhaps you drift into negative mindsets from time to time. Maybe it's every so often, but maybe it's pretty frequent and you find yourself dwelling there. Right? And maybe you're not just setting up a tent, you're laying a foundation and pouring concrete and erecting a house. You know, you tend to find yourself drawn towards negativity and blaming other people, thinking about the worst about yourself or others, or looking around and wishing that things were different, but then also making excuses for why things can't change. Because negativity will destroy us from the inside out. Right? It starts in our heart, and then it seeps into how you think about yourself and how you think about others. It affects relationships, career, school, alters how you think about church and about God. About negativity, Proverbs says, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. This is also why it's important that we as a church speak encouragement to each other and to those around us. Because so many people get crushed by others' words, right? We have to be able to speak truth and love and encouragement into others. That's why, again, I love youth camp, because the leaders especially get to spend time speaking truth and encouragement into the students who come. Because all day long, right, they hear how, students at school, they live with negativity. They live with envy, right? They're graded constantly. And if they mess up, they come home, and parents probably are like, why did you score that low, right? And it's very easy for them to just be built negativity upon negativity upon negativity. And so I love times at camp because, Aubrey will just spend time with them saying, you know what, I see in you. And then he will just word vomit joy into their life. And it's all true. Right? And that's one of those things that we should be able to do as a church to those around us, because you might not have students, but you have people at your work that are struggling. But negativity dries up the bones. What's the remedy? A joyful heart. Knowing that the arrival of the King is coming means we don't have to blame others now. We don't have to let present circumstances determine our current state of joy, because our joy is in the future. We know who's coming back. It's certain. We know who wins. So I don't have to worry or wish that things were different or blame others, right? Because I can look forward to the hope and joy to come. Number 3, a feeling of spiritual disconnect. I think that all of us here, even if you don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, if you had the opportunity to do a Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure time machine and go back and walk with him and listen to him, would probably take that opportunity, right? To be able to at least, even just get 15 minutes, get an hour to see how Jesus spoke to people and how he physically healed them. I want to know what kind of humor he had, right? To see just those things that maybe the Bible doesn't tell us about his personality. It would be so cool to be able to hang out with Jesus like the disciples did. But we don't have that anymore. And so no matter how close we are to God in our spiritual walk, there's still a disconnect. And so, imagine if I was able to read letters that Angie wrote me that I could read, and maybe you guys told me that Angie loved me, but I had never really been in her presence. Right? What if I never saw her? I could know that love was there, but there's something different when you're in the presence of the very person that loves you. And when Jesus left, he knew it would be hard on his disciples because of that disconnect. They at least got the chance to walk with him. We haven't even gotten the chance to physically be in his presence yet, but we know that he loves us. But he told his disciples, "So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy." He's telling his disciples, hey, I'm coming back. You'll see me again. And for us, we're going to see him for the first time ever. How amazing is that going to be? To be confronted and experience the holiness and magnificence of Christ. We'll be fully known at that point. There's going to be no more secrets that you can hide or things that you keep inside and don't tell anyone else, but it's also going to be okay at the same time because you're going to be in his presence and you know that he loves you completely and that he died for you and gave himself up for you. And then joy, the arrival, the advent of joy also helps us to overcome shame and guilt today, because oftentimes, how many times do we let shame and guilt keep us from moving forward in life? We all have things we wish we would have done differently or said differently. And oftentimes we can think, well, I can't go forward because if this person just found out or whatever reason, or we just feel tied to our past, or we can't forgive ourselves for whatever reason, and we feel like we'll never measure up. And so oftentimes maybe you have shame and guilt, and then you have that spirit of negativity that comes in as well, and then you look around, but other people can seem to do it, so then you have envy, and they just seem to build on each other. Jesus' first miracle was at a wedding when they ran out of wine. And so in a culture where hospitality is of supreme importance, if you run out of wine, you're going to carry shame and guilt with you, probably for the rest of your life. And so it's in that very context, a potential shame and guilt, when Jesus, at the prompting of his mother, did his first miracle. And was like, not here, not today. This is a joyous celebration. And so Jesus was like, in my presence, we're going to have joy. And so shame and guilt can also come from where we maybe feel like we have fallen short in life, where we feel like we could have maybe deserved more, or where we wish we could have done better for God. Maybe we look back and we're like, man, I wish I would have gotten involved in a ministry, or maybe we feel like I wish I would have been more diligent in studying the Bible, because you look around and you feel like, man, this person has a good relationship with God, and this person, they know so much about the Bible, but I don't. Maybe you feel like your prayer life is out of whack and you just do it every so often when you remember, or maybe you start to do it at night and then you fall asleep and then you wake up and you feel like, oh no, I fell asleep on God. It's okay. And the Israelites felt this because they rejected him for a long time, right? And so they had to deal with the consequences when he sent them over to Assyria and he sent them over to Babylon. But then when they came back, they started to build a wall. And it was during that time when they realized just how far they had fallen and gotten away from God. It says, then Nehemiah, the governor, Ezra, the priest and teacher of the law, and the Levites who were instructing the people, said to them all, this day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep. For all the people had been weeping as they listened to the words of the law. They realized how far they had fallen. They realized how much they had disregarded God and his word. And so even though they would say that they followed God and that they were his people, they look back, they're like, man, we just screwed up and we did not follow him here and there. And we got away from his word and we should have done this better and that better. But he didn't want them to live in shame and guilt. And so Nehemiah says, go, enjoy choice food and sweet drinks, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is holy to our Lord. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. Nehemiah is like, you're God's people. Shame and guilt have no place in your life. So let's move forward. And today, Christ is like, the shame and guilt that you feel, I took care of that on the cross for you. Your shame, your guilt were placed on me, so stop trying to put it back into your life. Which is easier said than done. But as we look to the advent of joy, its fullness, we can realize that because we are in Christ, we really have no reason to live with shame and guilt, carrying it around month after month and year after year. And so the advent of joy to come helps us to overcome envy and negativity, spiritual disconnect, and shame and guilt now. It frees us from those things that bring disorder into our lives. And the joy to come starts to give us feelings of wholeness and peace now, knowing that you're God's kids, sons and daughters of the King. So keep your mind focused on Advent. Right? It's a really simple but a really, really powerful thing. It's when we get our minds off of Advent and the coming that we start to allow shame and guilt and envy and negativity and disconnect back into our lives. And so the advent of joy declares to us that a day is coming when those intense yet fleeting periods of joy in our lives will find fulfillment, and they will last, and they will be consistent day after day after day as we are in the presence of the King and when we are perfectly at peace. Envy and negativity, shame and guilt, disconnect are done away with as we get to live and experience Christ for all eternity. It invites us to live for him now and start to experience, though only in parts and fragments, a joy that when it comes will be like anything we've ever experienced. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you are not a God that just gives rules and tells us where we don't measure up. You're a God that actually wants us to experience true, full joy. You desire that your kids have joy in their life. And sometimes we can get so wrapped up in looking at where we don't measure up and where we're messed up that we can forget that you actually want us to live and to walk in joy like a parent desires that their kids walk in joy and have peace. And so help us to remember that. Help us to look forward to the advent of the King and how with him comes hope and love and joy and peace. And we get to experience parts and fragments of that now. And we know that when you come, we get to experience all of it in complete wholeness, in a state that we won't leave. And so help us to realize that, to live for you now. Do not allow envy and negativity and disconnect, shame and guilt to disrupt our lives. Help us to live in your joy. In Christ's name.